Hey guys, welcome back to the Kaleido Roasters USA YouTube channel. This channel and all of its content is brought to you by Espresso Outlet. Espresso Outlet's the official distributor of Kaleido Roasters in the USA, so make sure to go to their website and check them out at www.kaleidoroasters.com. So today we're going to focus on a portion of the roasting curve that sometimes goes by a couple different names or the terms get used interchangeably. So some of the terms that I hear are the Maillard phase, the middle phase, the browning phase. All those terms are essentially referring to the same portion that we're looking at on the graph today. And just as we progress in this video, understand that they are all somewhat related to the same thing. This is video number 4 in this series. Previously, we've discussed getting started with artisan. It's kind of a longer video, but it does take the time to really dive a little bit deeper into understanding the definitions and the different portions of the roasting graph within artisan. Also, we've done a video on charge temp and turning point, and video number 3 was the drying phase. So if you've not watched any of those videos, I would recommend clicking pause and going back and starting at the beginning of this series so that you get the most benefit out of this video. But to keep going, so what is this Maillard or browning phase? Previously, we discussed that the drying takes about 45 to 50% of our roast duration. So we have our drying phase over here, and it takes about, we'll say 50% just to use nice round numbers. And the portion that we're looking at today is going to be 30% of our roasting duration is the browning phase. So in front of us, we have this hypothetical 10-minute long roast. If we were to do the percentage, that would be about 5 minutes is dedicated to drying, 3 minutes is dedicated to browning, and 2 minutes is dedicated to the development portion of our beans. So why do they call it the middle phase? Well, you can see we have our drying phase down here, and it's this portion. It does have a gray, white on this specific graph, but usually it's just all white or all one color. This is going to be our drying temperature portion. And you can see this bar in the middle, and that's why they call it the middle phase. And this is where the browning begins to take place. So we have these beans, they start out, they're kind of a green, and they turn a little bit yellow, kind of white. And once that browning phase begins, obviously it's turning brown. So you can see the browning phase begins when we click that dry in button. So our beans, they start out as like a green, and we're drying them out. They almost become almost a white color. And at that point, when we click the dry end, we're going to go into that browning phase. And that's where the browning process and the chemical reactions start to take place. Now, similarly, the browning phase ends once first crack begins. And we'll talk about that in another video. It's fairly easy to hear when first crack starts on a Kaleido. So we'll talk about that at a later time. But we're looking at this portion between dry end and first crack for our browning phase. So what's happening in this phase? Well, we're taking these beans and we're caramelizing the sugars or the carbohydrates within the coffee bean, and that's what gives it its brown color. Similarly, you have amino acids in the beans, and that's going to give the coffee its acidity. And usually when I think of acidity, yeah, you have acidity, but I'm thinking more fruit-forward flavors. And how can we use this phase to get the most out of our coffee? I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this phase sometimes is called a couple different things, and one of those terms is the Maillard phase or the Maillard reaction. So what is a Maillard reaction? It might be a term that you've not heard before or not very familiar with. Maybe you heard it, but you've not really ever thought about it. And Maillard reactions, they take place in more things than you might realize. So in simple terms, it is just taking a protein and a sugar, and when you introduce the heat, it's going to give off caramelization. And when you think of caramelization, that's going to be your flavor and your aroma. And those are those things that we're really looking for in a good cup of coffee generally. I mean, I like really aromatic, flavorful coffee. So that's what we're shooting for here. So I know you still might not understand what a Maillard reaction is. So I wanted to do, these are kind of some extremes. They're not coffee related, but I think it'll relate to you a little bit better. Think of something like an onion. When you get an onion, they're very potent. Your eyes may water, almost sulfury. But if we cut it up and we put it into a pan, we're introducing that heat, that potent onion starts to turn sweet. It caramelizes. So you're taking and you're doing a chemical reaction to take something from that really potent, strong, and you're breaking down all those carbohydrates and you're getting the sugars by caramelizing that onion, turning it more sweet. Another example is think of like a steak. Let's say we have a steak, we have two different steaks, and we put one in the oven. We're just gonna bake it. It's probably not gonna taste bad, but it's gonna be more on the bland side. You'll have a little bit of the savoriness and just kind of your traditional steak flavor, but it's probably gonna be a lot more boring. So let's say we take our second steak and we grill it, but we add a sear to create a more complex flavor profile. We're giving that caramelized sweetness and savoriness to the outside of the steak, which is going to be more pleasing. So those are two maybe more relatable examples of Maillard reactions. I know that doesn't really relate to coffee well, but I want you to understand what we're doing in this phase. So in terms of roasting coffee, if this Maillard reaction is too short, your coffee is going to get this really grassy and sour flavor. And that's not really desirable. But similarly, let's say we go too long, your coffee is going to be really flat and boring. Sometimes people call that baked, and it tastes like coffee, but it's just really nothing to think about and not really enjoy. So let's just follow up on like what this Maillard reaction is. I just hit it a second ago, but if we rush through this phase, we're going to get really bitter or tart coffee. The chemical reactions, they just didn't have enough time to take place, and you're not going to get any of that sweetness out of your coffee. And you're going to get a lot of undesirable flavors. So we hear a lot of people, my coffee, it looks great. The done color is perfect, but it tastes sour. Why is it sour? Well, that's telling me that your beans didn't have enough time to go through all that Maillard reaction process and caramelize all those sugars in your bean. So you're going to get all that sourness. So let's say we decrease our temperature a little bit, allowing that Maillard reaction a little additional time to take place. We're going to allow those reactions to introduce that sweetness into the coffee bean before we get to that development phase. The development phase makes the beans look pretty, but this phase is what's giving it a lot of its flavor and aroma. Similarly, if you take too long, the sweetness is going to start to turn bitter. And any of the acidity, and when I think of acidity, I'm thinking like all your fruit flavors, they're going to start going away. You're going to get this very boring baked flavor. So another example that we hear is, I got these really fruity beans and I know they should taste really fruity, and they just don't taste good. They just taste boring. They just taste like coffee. And that's telling me that you dragged through this phase and you got rid of all the sweetness that would have been in the coffee had you gone a little bit quicker. So in that instance, I would probably, on my next roast, want to increase a little bit more heat and go through this phase a little bit quicker. So I hope overall this video helps you understand the browning phase and what's actually going on in your coffee bean. As you can tell, this is a very important and I would say often overlooked part of the roasting process. This is the part of the process where it's going to bring out those flavor characteristics of your coffee bean and really make that origin that you're trying to roast shine. So if you're finding this video series interesting and it's helping you become a better roaster and you have not clicked the subscribe button yet, I'd ask you to consider clicking the subscribe, because we're going to have a lot of upcoming videos in this series as well as some additional roasting content in the future. Next time we're going to take a look at first crack, development, and the drop temperature. So make sure to check back soon, but for today, thanks for watching.